Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian Online Seminar Group. First, come hands up, then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during her presentation or after her presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Shelley Xin Li. Shelley Xin Li is an assistant professor of accounting at the University of South California, Marshall School of Business. She received her doctoral degree in business administration, accounting, and management from the Harvard Business School. Shelley used a mix of research methods, field experimental archival studies, and surveys to examine two high-level research questions. One, how are management control mechanisms used to achieve hard-to-measure outcomes, innovations, and long-term performance? Two, how technology-enabled information sharing system, information-based control mechanism, drive organizational performance. In answering these questions, she published in top-ranking journals, including the Accounting Review, Journal of Accounting Research, Management Science, Contemporary Accounting Research, Accounting Organization and the Society, and Accounting Horizon. Shelley currently serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Management Accounting Research. Now we will start our seminar with the Professor Shelley Xin Li.
Thank you, Mohammed. Hi, everyone. I see some familiar faces. Greetings from Southern California. I want to first thank all of you for attending this workshop. It's very early here in LA, and I'm sure it's late at night, where you are in a lot of the places. And a special thanks to Mohammed for inviting me and for organizing this amazing online workshop series. You are doing something very meaningful and valuable for the global academic community. So thank you. And I am honored to share my research with you all today. I'm sorry, I have a surgery scheduled late this afternoon after this presentation, so I'm not allowed to eat or drink anything, even water. So I may experience some trouble with my voice from here to there. Okay, so Muhammad has graciously given me the flexibility to cover 3 of my field experiment studies rather than focusing on one single early stage paper like what's typical in most accounting seminars. And you see, my research is in managerial accounting, and at least some would say it's a smaller subfield within accounting research compared to financial accounting. And I focus on the field experiment method, which remains relatively uncommon in accounting research. So today what I'll do is at first will give you a brief description of the context and motivation for my research and the field experiment method in case some of you are not familiar. And then I will go through 3 field experiments that I have conducted and published to give you some very concrete examples of field experiments, like what kind of questions that field experiments can answer, and also what we found. That is, what do we know? What can we say about the effects of information sharing within organizations? And last, I will talk about the steps involved in designing and carrying out a field experiment and call on you to do the same if you are interested in doing so. Okay, let's start it. You see, I often get asked why my research is accounting, because even by looking at this title, effects of information sharing within organizations, some people say, well, that's information systems research or operations research. To be honest, I personally don't care about the labels, but since we are in accounting academia, so here's what I usually say. You see, the effects, the accounting at its core is about measuring performance and then analyzing the performance you measured. And then you take the measurement and the analysis of the performance, you either communicating that to external stakeholders, like equity investors, your equity analysts or debt holders or governments, right? Or you take that measurement and you use that to drive better organizational performance as managers, right? So in financial accounting, they focus more on communicating performance to external stakeholders. In managerial accounting, we focus more on how we can use that to drive better organizational performance. So that is my focus. But whether it's communicating performance or driving performance, as accounting researcher, the starting point is measurement, is measuring performance and how well we can measure performance. So what are some of the big trends in performance measurements over the past few decades? I mean, on the one hand, we see that the desired organizational performance measures, performance outcomes become harder to measure, right? So now organizations compared to half a century ago, care more about outcomes like innovation, creativity, or some long-term performance that are inherently more difficult to measure. But interestingly, on the other hand, with the advances in technology, there is a greater availability of metrics and information sharing technologies that enables organizations to continuously tracking their employees' activities so they can do deeper quantification of work and then, share information through internal and external social networks. So these two trends in parallel informed my two high-level research questions. One is, how do we adapt management control systems to manage those hard-to-measure outcomes? The other is, how should we best leverage or use the enhanced capabilities of measuring, analyzing, and communicating information to drive better performance? And today I'm going to focus on all my field experiments are focusing on the second question. So what I'll do is I'll go through 3 field experiments that study the causal effects, the performance effects of sharing work-related numbers, performance data, and then sharing work itself. And third, adding structure to unstructured knowledge sharing in the context of likely information overload. Doing all of these without changing the explicit incentives within that organization. Now, because I'm going to go through 3 field experiments as opposed to 1 study, so I won't have the time to go into all the details of the studies. And I won't show any regression tables. I'll tell you the setting, I'll tell you the design, and I'll summarize the finding for you. But if you're interested, you can find all of these 3 papers on my website. You can download them. You can even read through them as I talk about it if you're curious about some details. Okay, and you can stop me at any point to ask questions. If I only have 1 screen right now, so if I don't see you, just unmute yourself and let me know. Okay, so what are field experiments? Field experiments are studies using experimental design that occur in a natural setting. So instead of a lab experiment, the experiment is carried out in the field or the real world. So what this has is, it has the random assignment in a lab experiment, right? So that helps us with causal inference because we're randomly assigning, let's say, half of the stores, half of the employees to the treatment condition and half in the control condition. That enables the internal validity of the study. But we're doing this in a real world setting, so there's a little bit of that external validity, or at least realism. Okay, so there are different types of field experiments. If you search for John List, who's economist at University of Chicago, and in his framework, he classifies several types of field experiments. So what I'm going to talk about today, all these 3 studies are natural field experiments. So those are the field experiments where the participants are not aware that they're part of the study. And so what typically happens is then the organization will just carry the experiment out as part of their normal course of operations. The employees don't know they're part of a study. And obviously, as with any experiments, you need the institutional review board, IRB approval. You often need a data usage agreement with the research sites. And here I want to pause and emphasize that although I personally love field experiments, the excitement, but I want to emphasize that I think all research methods are valuable. So the parallel here is to think about the healthcare setting, right? So for us, the typical large-scale archival studies would be like the large observational data analysis that say examine the correlation between perceived stress and health outcomes, right? And this type of studies are very important because they're often the first kind of evidence that we have that establishes this robust pattern, right? Empirical pattern that links stress to health outcomes, right? And then you have lab experiments where in a controlled environment, you carefully test the causal effects of, let's say, some chemical compounds on stress hormones, and that then by extension on health outcomes, right? And obviously that's very important. And then you take it further to the field and you study the causal effects of an intervention, let's say a drug, a procedure, a certain type of treatment protocol on real people, right? And living their lives. So with all of these methods together, that gives us, they gave us the evidence-based medicine. So I'm trying to say is if we want management research to also be, or management practice to be evidence-based, we also need all of these methods. And so today I'm going to talk about the natural field experiments. Okay, so let's start with the first study. In the first study, I look at the big research question is, so what are the effects of sharing work-related data, performance data? And so here's what I mean, because in the traditional performance review, which a lot of us know, right, it's led by a manager. So here is this lady on top of on the top. And basically, the organizations would track people's performance and once in a while, periodically. So in the past, often it's quarterly or annually, this manager would then take all of the data the organization tracks and aggregate the data, filter the data, and frame the data. So what does this mean, right? Whether it's good or bad, and then delivers the performance evaluation, the feedback to these subordinates or employees. But with advances in tracking technology, so here we see. So for example, in a lot of the companies, in the US, or in a lot of other countries, technology can enable companies to track their workers' every move. For example, at UPS, through these different type of devices they install in the trucks, they can monitor the driver's every move. And in Amazon, inside these big warehouses, they can also track employees' every move and even have scoreboards to shame its workers for not being active or productive all the time. And perhaps even more scarily, here you have some Swedish workers are getting microchips implanted in their hands, which I'm like, But my point is now technology has get to a point where the organization can automatically generate a lot of high frequency, very granular performance data or activity data for the frontline workers. So it's less feasible for the managers to sit down once a year and then aggregate all of the data and deliver the data to employees. So increasingly, a lot of organizations, what they're doing is to remove the middleman, the managers, who you can think of as intermediaries in performance feedback, right? Because they're intermediating between the information source and the employees who needed to see their performance data. Increasingly, that intermediary is removed and employees are directly seeing their performance data, often at a very high frequency, the daily performance data or hourly, themselves. So what does this mean? And what is the effect of disintermediating managers from this performance feedback process? So This field experiment, the setting is that it is at a natural gas utility service organization in the United States. And basically, you have these frontline mechanics or workers. They are in their trucks and they receive the service requests from the dispatch center in their truck. And much like the UPS truck, their truck can track their every move and know, where they are and tell them which route to take. And these service calls are usually turn on and off gas or fix some simple things, right? And the organization at some point, like I said, started to install these devices in the truck and some handheld devices as well, which then enabled them to generate a daily scorecard for employees that tracks the different types of time that they spend during the day. So for example, you have the percentage of productive time here, which really means the strictly productive time, the revenue generating time. So this is the time they're spending actually serving customers and fixing things, right? And then you have the completely, the pink or red color is the completely non-productive time. So this is a time where they're taking a break, right? They're taking lunches, they're taking a phone call, like idle time, where they're doing nothing. And then you have this middle bucket, which is more neutral, is called the support time. That is, they're not really taking a break, but they're not serving the customer. So this is usually they're maintaining their trucks or some equipment, or they're doing some training sessions. So it's work related, but not revenue generating. So the parallel of this, if you think about it, is the legal profession. The percentage of productive time would be like billable hours. Okay. So now, but previously, this daily scorecard is only seen by the employee supervisors. And the supervisors see like everybody's scorecard in their work center, and they see, okay, somebody's like, then they decide essentially, at their discretion when and how to deliver the feedback. And they may say, well, well, Shelley, it seems like you have a really high percentage of non-productive time for this past week. What's going on? Or they may not, right? So like it really depends on the individual supervisor. But the intervention is this, which is that we randomly assign 31 mechanics from 4 work centers. They have 11 work centers and 123 mechanics in total. So we assign 31 of them into the treatment group and the other in the control group. And so as you can see, before the intervention began, the information environment or conditions were the same between the treatment and the control group, which is you have the raw performance data, the daily scorecard, the percentage of productive, non-productive time, and then that flows to the supervisor, and then from the supervisor, the performance feedback goes to the frontline workers. And as the intervention began, the intervention is that in a treatment group, the performance data, the daily scorecard, is simultaneously available to the supervisors and the mechanics. And for the control group, we keep the condition the same as before. That's why they're the control group. So what do you think we found? And I feel like the first hypothesis is, yes, obviously now you see the direct data, and it should have a effect on motivating you to work harder. So we would be able to see some improvement in performance. And that's true to a large extent. So we use a standard diff and diff, DID design to analyze the data. So when we use the percentage of non-productive time as a dependent variable, here's what we found. So basically, the treatment group experienced a very significant drop in non-productive time, because all of a sudden it's very clear that you are taking a lot of non-productive time and nobody wants to be that person. But the interesting thing is that doesn't all become an increase in the strictly productive time. So we see very low performance heterogeneity in reducing non-productive time, which is considered the bad behaviors in this context. That means whoever you are, whatever characteristics the employee has, basically across the board, everybody cut their non-productive time. But there is significant heterogeneity in the effects on the strictly productive time. Like who actually turns this reduction of non-productive time into actually serving customers and generating revenue for the company. And that's very interesting. And so basically the mindset is conform, not excel. And we see this not just from the data, we also in this setting sent an embedded participant into the company. We hired a research assistant who disguised, you may say, as a apprentice who, so then were following the different mechanics in their service runs after we launched the intervention. So he could hear what the mechanics and the supervisor's reaction to the intervention was, and made notes for that. And the prevailing mindset is to conform, not excel. So basically, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to stand out in terms of the bad behavior, the non-productive time. That's why I reduce it significantly. But I also don't particularly want to stand out in the strictly productive time either. At least that's the mindset for many employees. So what is so then we did some heterogeneous like cross-sectional tests. Like where do we see the performance improvements most, right? So where are the effects, the treatment effects greater or weaker? So we see that the performance improvement are greatest for employees who previously perceived the lower level of supervisor support. And the way we measure that is through a pre-intervention survey. So before we launch the intervention, we, the researchers, launched a survey to measure a number of things that we think would be important moderators, right? So for example, here, we think the perceived level of supervisor support is important because what we're testing is the effects of disintermediation, right? Basically, we're taking away the intermediary in performance feedback delivery. So then the natural thing to think, to hypothesize is that the effect of this disintermediation would depend on the quality of the intermediary. So if you already had a high quality supervisor who is giving you all the performance information and perhaps some coaching, then you are already getting the value from the feedback. On the other hand, if you have bad supervisors from whom you never got good performance feedback or useful performance feedback or any feedback at all, where you just don't trust the supervisor. In this case, removing that person and having you see your performance data directly would be particularly beneficial. And that's what we found. And then also we found that the performance improvements are the greatest for those who had relatively low intrinsic or relatively high extrinsic motivation. This is again through the pre-intervention survey where we measure the workers' motivation type. So here, basically, the way we interpret the finding is that if you have higher extrinsic motivation, you would pay more attention to these external benchmarks that all of a sudden becomes much more salient. Okay, I see something in the chat. Let me see. 2 questions. Oh, Ken. Hi, Ken. Have you gone the next step to disclose what the organizations do with these data? Okay, I'll get to that. And second, would you feel confident in generalize the findings? So those are great questions. So I will address the second question first, because I will get to the steps of carrying out and implementing field experiments later. So in terms of generalizability, that is really a big issue in terms of the kind of comments we need to address during the publication process. What I would say is that because we only have one organization, right? And we have to be very careful in generalizing what we find. The average treatment effect across organizations. Let's say we find the average treatment effect here in the setting of reducing non-productive time to be 15%, right? And that is unlikely to be super generalizable across organizational settings. But the conditions we found, the theories we're testing, the theoretical generalizability is very important here, because here, when we say, so under what conditions we find greater effects, right? So let's say when the theory would predict the quality of the supervisor or the perceived supervisor support would be an important moderator, right? And then we go on, we test that, and then we see, well, the benefits are bigger in settings where employees perceive lower supervisor support. This condition that we're testing, this theory-informed hypothesis we're testing, and that finding is more likely to be generalizable across settings. So I think it's a long way of saying that, yes, we have to be careful, we have to caveat and describe the kind of settings that we're dealing with here. So for example, here is a setting without strong financial incentives. So I would describe that in the paper, and I would say these findings are likely to directly generate to organizations that are similar to this organization, right? And then I would say, even for other organizations, I think the hypothesis we're testing here, these moderatory effects that are based on theory, are likely to be theoretically generalizable. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one, and then I'll go back and talk about some of the other questions later. Okay, so after we conduct this previous experiment, this is the effects of sharing work-related data, right? So I wonder, what is the effect of sharing work itself? So in this case, the work that I'm looking at is creative work. So the setting here for this field experiment is a mobile phone retail chain in India. So basically, in these mobile phone retail chains in India, you have different brands, either inside a store or right outside of the retail store. They have their stands and they have their, posters. And a lot of these posters are handwritten or hand drawn by the salespeople for that brand, and it's a important tool to attract foot traffic and use as a marketing tool, and also an information source for the salespeople to explain the deals to the potential customers. But in this particular setting, when we started talking with them, one problem they're facing is that they realize a lot of the salespeople are not very engaged on their job. And in particular, a lot of the posters are of very low quality. So the owner's incentive, the motivation in solving the motivation is to solve that problem, which is how can we increase the quality of these sales posters, right? And the intervention that we designed was to launch an information sharing system in the treatment store. So we have 4 months of pre-period and 4 months of post-period. We randomly select half of the stores as treatment stores, where when intervention starts, we implement the information sharing system, and the salespeople at those treatment stores can scan their posters, upload to the system, and share with each other among the treatment store salespeople. And in the control store, it was the same as before. Each individual salespeople just design and make their own posters. So this is what the app looks like. We actually hire people to design the app for them. You have a home screen, and so they can access this from their computer or from their phones or their iPad. And so basically you have the home screen, and then you can browse other people's posters, or you can upload your own poster by taking a photo. And then we actually also hire people to make sure that everybody uploads their posters, and the posters are organized by brands and store, and then you can click on and see the actual posters. And so here, what we want to see is whether sharing this, creative work itself is going to have an impact on first the quality of the creative work itself, and then on employee engagement. Because even if the quality of the creative work itself didn't change, but by, investing more time into creating the posters, that could change employees' engagement level. And then also ultimately, because these are salespeople, what's the sales financial outcome, right? And what you may say, well, of course, if they see the creative work, the quality of the creative work would be higher, because now they have, more information to spark their creative thinking. But on the other hand, the very idea of creativity is something that's novel, right? So previously, maybe that Shelley is not very artistically talented, and so my poster doesn't look that good. But at least I was actively thinking about how to translate the deals of the product I'm selling into a poster that resonate with my local customers, right? And now with the information sharing, a concern is that now I would no longer need to do that. I'll just go to the app and click on a poster that's of the same brand and copy that person's poster. So in that process, I would think less deeply about, the deals and how to persuade my customers. And maybe the poster, even though it may look prettier, but resonate less with the local customers, the customers that I'm serving, and then not translate into good sales outcomes. So that's sort of the tension behind the research question. And also, we also built this app for the local customers to eventually rate the posters, because we need to rate the quality of the posters, and we don't want to be the judge, and we wouldn't be appropriate judge anyways. So we actually hired people and approached, I want to say, well, at least the hundreds of the customers walking by at different locations and showing them these pictures of the posters on the iPad, and just ask them to drag into the different categories. And we measure the creativity or the quality of the posters on two dimensions. One is how valuable it is, which is how useful the customers find it to be. The other is how novel it is, which is how attractive, eye-grabbing that the customers find it to be. So what did we find? We actually didn't find statistically significant average treatment effects, okay? And in retrospect, that's not too surprising, because this is a setting where they didn't have any sort of information sharing system. So it was a situation from 0 to 1. A lot of effort had to go into getting people to adopt the system. Yes, we thought about ways to get them to upload the posters, but there's no way we can force people to go into the system and check the posters. But we see significant heterogeneity in treatment effects, first depending on access frequency. So basically, we see that in this setting, the more the salespeople access the app, the better the performance outcome, the better the outcomes, right? Which in a way kind of validates the intervention. That is to say, the treatment effect increases with the compliance, right? With the strength of the treatment. And in addition to that, we find that the treatment effects varies with pre-existing information condition. So basically, we find the quality of the creative work to be higher for isolated stores. Those are the stores that are in physically more isolated locations, where the salespeople didn't have any prior natural exposure to other salespeople's posters, right? So there were no natural information channels that existed before that would let them see and learn from other people's posters. So for those people, the treatment effect is more significant. And then also the prior performance level. So basically, we find better performance outcomes in terms of higher sales for the previous low performers in terms of the quality of creative work. And then we we find that the treatment effect also depends on whether the market values your creative work, because the assumption is that the market would value a better poster. That's not necessarily true. So basically, we found that the quality of the creative work is higher and the employee engagement level is higher for the kind of markets that value more customized services and value these kind of more useful and attractive posters. So that's what we found with this field experiment. And interestingly, as we were then presenting what we found from this field experiment at conferences, at one of the conferences where they invited both academics and practitioners. So we were presenting this experiment, and one of the finding, which is not even our main finding, but the finding is that we found that we have better performance outcomes, better treatment effects if the employees access the system more, if the employees use the app more, right? And afterwards, we have executive from a European grocery store chain who approached us and said, I find this finding very interesting, because you're saying the more employees use the app, the better the performance outcome. That's not necessarily consistent with what I found in reality, because you see, in my company, we have this very fancy enterprise social network system, like kind of a Facebook for workplace, right? Employees are constantly on the system, posting pictures, interacting with each other. We have 90%, daily active, usage rate. But what I found is, despite all of that usage of the system and all the information, I'm not sure they're using the system in a productive way. They're using the system productively, right? They could just take random pictures, or they could congratulate each other. Oh, happy birthday. And so then we thought, oh, that's interesting. And then we talked more with this executive, and we realized that the setting is different. Because in this field experiment in India, the setting is there was no pre-existing online information sharing system. So the challenge we face is 0 to 1 to get people to share information, use the system. But in this European grocery store chain, the setting is there is a widely used, highly used information sharing system, and there is a high potential for information overload there. So then how do you make sure information sharing is effective in the context of high information overload? So that's essentially what we're looking at. And speaking of generalizability, this potential information overload setting is, applicable to many organizations today, right? Because a lot of organizations have these peer-to-peer spontaneous information sharing system in their workplace, right? And it's flooded with information. Okay, so here what we're trying to test is, what are the effects of adding some structure to a mostly unstructured peer-to-peer knowledge sharing platform. Specifically, the structure we're thinking about is implementing a system for sharing best practices. And that's in the context of a pre-existing online peer network. And so the way I think about it is, these enterprise social networks sometimes is like a desert with a lot of sense, that's a lot of information. So actually then it becomes difficult for employees to find useful information if they want to find, okay, how do I improve the sales on bananas, for example, in a retail store setting, and they have to search for that information in millions, billions of grains of sand, right? And then they may find piece of that information where some people share the actions they take, let's say to display bananas, right? And design like a sales campaign, but they don't really know how well that action worked out for them, right? They don't know the quality of that information. Or sometimes they get a piece of information where people brag about or disclose, oh, we did really well in sales this quarter, but they really didn't share how they did that, right? So the intervention, the system for sharing best practices is, can we then put the pieces of information of action and results together by asking the verified high performing stores to systematically share their best practices, right? So this way you link actions with results, and it's in a structured way, so it's always shared in a particular location, in a particular format, so that people know how to find that, right? And so here we go. So this is a natural field experiment at a grocery store chain in Europe. And basically here we randomly assigned 274 stores from 5 regions to the treatment group and the rest to the control group. And at the start of the intervention, the selected high-performing units from the treatment group started their first post about best practices. And then toward the end of 2019, they posted their last post about best practices. I see something from the chat. Would system complexity, versatility be a reason? The app in India seems very simple. I feel that if the social networking app becomes more versatile, it moves towards homogeneity, like LinkedIn, look a lot more like Facebook. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think the complexity and of the system, or really how fun the system is sometimes, is related to how much people use that, right? And then as also linked to the information overload that we're looking at here. Okay, so coming back to the setting, what are these posts? So basically in the treatment group, this is the system for sharing best practices in each of the treatment region. So basically employees can, so once every 2 weeks, the selected verified best high performing stores would make a post, and this is really carried out in practice by the regional sales associate, because we want to make sure that everybody is sharing the information in a consistent format. Otherwise, we don't know whether the effect is due to this intervention, this best practice sharing intervention, or the fact that some stores are sharing information differently than other stores. And basically, it's this kind of like a Facebook album, and then people can see the best. This is it's very clear. Okay, look, here is the best practice post. And then first we have the information on high performing stores. So you know this is high quality information. This is from verified high performers, and then link to the album. And then you click on the link to the best practices in 5 major product categories. Once you click into one of these pictures, that you can see a picture that visualizes the best practice, and then the title of the best practice, what you need to do, and the results from that, right? So this is not a actual example from the intervention. This is what we used to describe the protocol for the intervention so people can carry it out, and the explanation of why this would work. And so again, this is a DID, difference in difference visualization. As we can see prior to the intervention, the sales trend is roughly parallel, the same between the treatment and control groups. Starting from the intervention, the treatment group starts, so they didn't really diverge immediately. As you can see, these kind of best practices or information-based intervention of learning from best practices has a somewhat of a delay, but the sales trend of the treatment group is increasing over time, which leads to a 3.7% increase at the end of the implementation period, which luckily was right before COVID broke out. And so we found that the sales, in terms of heterogeneous effects, we find that sales improvements was greatest in stores that perceived more information overload from the online network before the intervention, right? So again, this is measured by the pre-intervention survey and validated by the system usage data. And also the sales improvement was also greatest in stores with prior lower exposure to offline peers. This is actually similar to the experiment in India, right, where we find the effects of information sharing, information-based intervention was greater for isolated stores, the stores who didn't previously have access to knowledge about how to make better creative work. Here we find similar thing. We find the treatment effect, the benefits goes more to the kind of peers who previously had lower access to information related to best practices. And this is another thing that's reassuring is when we see sort of similar empirical patterns start to appear across different settings. And also, we find a positive rather than a negative spillover effect, because here the tension with the research question, which I forgot to mention, was that one may think, yes, of course, now you put all the best practices together and people are going to learn from them, so you're going to see better results, right? So that seems to be duh. But on the other hand, there is a reason to have a peer-to-peer spontaneous sharing network to begin with, right? If this structured best practice sharing is seen as, if adding the structure to the system is perceived by the participants as essentially you're trying to regulate their behavior. Like you're trying to say only certain type of stores, like these high-performing stores, only certain type of content are valued in the system, then the concern is that adding this structure, having this system, would then discourage, demotivate the rest of the stores to share information. And the information they share sometimes may be useful for a particular setting, right? So again, the tension here is whether adding the structure would then crowd out some of these organic peer-to-peer spontaneous knowledge sharing. But here what we found is that, at least with this intervention, we found a positive rather than negative spillover effect, which is that we saw increased voluntary inter-store knowledge sharing outside of this structured information sharing system. And this is also, if you think about it, this is likely because now you have a structure, you have these best practices that serves as a scaffolding for people then to discuss their own best practices, right? To talk about information related to, oh, look, I saw this store display banana this way, and here's what we did. Like maybe sparring some of these follow-up interactions and conversations. So to summarize the findings from these three interventions, which all of them are related to technology-enabled, broad-based information sharing, right? So we see this type of information sharing in practice, that they can change the information flow within organizations. They can reduce information restrictions or bottlenecks. So if you think about some of these bad managers as bad intermediaries or the bottlenecks in performance feedback. But so it increases both transparency within organizations and can also increase noise or information overload. So information-based intervention in this new environment, we see that it could improve performance, although that's not guaranteed. In at least one of these settings, we didn't see a statistically significant average treatment effect. And then we see that they could have great performance heterogeneity depending on some pre-existing conditions. So what are these pre-existing conditions? First is pre-existing information condition, which, by the way, I think all of us in accounting research, not just in managerial accounting, should pay attention to these pre-existing information condition, because any intervention or explanatory variable you're looking at that's related to information, it does not happen in a vacuum. So it would really relate to the pre-existing information condition. And the type of information shared. So as we can see, if you're sharing the kind of information that's about bad behaviors, that tends to be, at least in our experiment, more powerful for intervention than sharing information about neutral kind of activity or positive activities. So because this matters, because it determines how much attention the participants would pay to this intervention. It also depends on the individual's own motivation type, and this is because their motivation type would decide how sensitive an individual's action would be to any external information stimulus. And ultimately, whether it would translate into better financial outcomes also depends on the market condition, which is how useful this information is in improving the performance outcomes. So what's intriguing in all of these three field experiments is to think about how will the role of managers and the control system that they use change with the availability of all of this technology-enabled information sharing mechanisms. And the future directions of this research would be to look at how organizations can best use the power of information sharing and the network technology to enhance creativity and problem solving, build stronger community and purposes, and achieve better performance. And with that, I'm going to start talking about the steps of reflecting on the steps of carrying out a field experiment study. And I wouldn't say my reflection or this summary is the most authoritative. Definitely it's not, but this is in my experience. So first step, obviously, is you want to find an organization that's interested in collaborating with you. And usually this is through personal connections or talking to alumni or students at your school, for us professors, right? Or going to these conferences, right? When you, like with one of the study, the last one was a direct result of presenting the previous study at one of the conferences. And then the next step is to talk to them, understand the organization through multiple interviews, general internet research, archival data research, so you can identify problems that they face or some new practice they consider implementing. And to be honest, if they're willing to talk to you, it's often not that hard to find a problem they're facing, because organizations are always facing new problems or considering trying out new practices, right? And so identify the problem. The third step is to brainstorm with them about solutions to that problem. So you come up with a list of potential interventions. So what I showed you in these previous three studies were the intervention we eventually settled upon, right? But for every of these final, like sort of, this is the one we decided to carry out, we probably brainstorm maybe between 3 to 10 possible interventions. And then you talk with them, because maybe not all of them are equally feasible, or maybe the organizations have their have their own preference. For example, with the Indian organization, our original idea was to sort of an incentive-based intervention, and their preference is not to use incentive as a tool. So we kind of pivoted toward an information-based intervention. And then this is very important. Step 4 is we can't always just be thinking about what the organization cares about, although that's the starting point. We also have to make sure that the research question and interventions are interesting and important to the academic audience. So that means for each of these possible interventions, we kind of want to frame them as a research question. We do some literature review to see if people have done something related to that. We ask ourselves, what's the tension behind this research question, right? Because let's say if you pay people, well, then of course they're going to, you're gonna get what you paid for, right? So you have to think a little bit deeper about the underlying theory mechanism and be able to articulate the potential contributions to the literature above and beyond what's already done before you move forward, right? And that's usually also a filter for you to prioritize this list of potential interventions. And step 5 is to settle on an intervention that both sides want to implement as a pilot study or experiment, that is, rather than rolling it out all at once. And this is kind of the hard thing. I mean, all of these steps can be hard. The first step is hard, is to find someone who's willing to work with you. And then also kind of to convince them to find something that an intervention both of you want to implement, and to convince them that they shouldn't roll it out all at once, because sometimes the solution that you come up with sounds so appealing and in practice they want to implement it right away to all of their stores, right? And in that case, you don't have a control group and it's not an experiment. So you kind of want to settle on an intervention with some richness and some tension, and then convince them, okay, why don't we, or would you be open to implement it as a pilot study in a subset of your stores or regions? And then step 6 is, if you settle on that, is to discuss with the organization to make sure that they have the capability, they can collect the data items that you need, and to prepare and sign a data usage agreement. So get the lawyers involved. And again, this varies from organization to organization, from country to country. Right now, I would say the most complicated process would be working with Europe after they have the general data protection regulations. I've heard that it may be easier, or at least it has been easier to work with organizations in Asia. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, I'm gonna pause here and see the question. In experiment 3, it will be interesting to see whether explicit information sharing policy leads to more homogeneous best practice. Oh yeah, that's very interesting. Yes, you're exactly right. Okay, so basically these first 6 steps, the goal is for us to get to a point where the organization now says, yes, we can do this, right? So the organization is green lighting this, and they can support you. And this next slide, which is step 7, is something that you need to do. Now you need to do all the design of the study. So we need to prepare a detailed research proposal, basically entire front end of the paper. That would include, so previously you have already hopefully articulated the research question and the potential contributions. Now you want to include the hypothesis, what are the sample selection, and what's your randomization strategy? What are the dependent variables you're considering? The independent variables, the independent variable is the treatment, basically the control variables, and what moderators would you be using, right? And the analysis method, are you going to use a difference in difference method? So specifically, you would want to first obtain, if it's possible, observational data, so archival data that already exists within the organization on some key dependent variables, let's say sales, and some key covariates, let's say, as if it's a randomization at the employee level, then you would think, age, gender, education level. At a store level, you may want to see the store size, store age, their previous sales levels or sales trends, right? And I'll tell you why that's helpful. So for example, you want to decide a randomization strategy. What is the level of the randomization? Am I randomizing at the mechanics level, at the individual level, or am I randomizing at the group level, the work center level, the store level, right? And here, what you want to consider is contamination, right? Because yes, if you are able to randomize at the individual level, you get a bigger sample size for your analysis, but it's unlikely that if, let's say, Max and I work at the same store and or the same work center, and he's randomly assigned to the treatment group, I'm randomly assigned to the control group, it's unlikely that I don't know what's going on, right? So then we call this contamination, right? So basically, then we would have to randomize at the entire group level. So we have to think about that. Do we need to do stratified randomization so that we can achieve balance on key covariance, right? So that's why you want to collect the covariance from the organization. So as you do the randomization, you can test if the covariance are balanced. And then also related to that is your power analysis, and this is very important. It helps us, one is it could help you decide the sample size for some field experiments, right? And if you already know the sample size, like in all of these 3 field experiments that I'm facing, because you're doing within the organization and they tell you how many stores, work centers, or employees they have. And in that case, power analysis is helpful to determine what is the minimum detectable effect size. And here's why we need to do power analysis is because let's say we run the intervention and in some of the cases, we don't find a statistically significant treatment effect, right? And we don't have any of the stars. And then what can we say about that? Can we say the intervention has no effect? So 0 effect, the true effect size is 0, or it's just that your sample size is not big enough, or your data is too noisy, so your statistical tests don't have enough power to test the effect size because the true effect size is very small. So let's say we have 30 stores and and this is why we get observational data from the company on their previous sales, right? Because from their archival data, we can extract how much noise their sales data, their baseline sales data have, and that noise can be put into our power analysis to give us this minimum detectable effect size. The bigger the noise in your underlying data, the bigger the minimum detectable effect size would be, right? So let's say when we do that and the minimum detectable effect size is 60%. That means my intervention needs to at least have increased sales by 60% for me to be able to detect the effect, for the effect to be statistically significant. And then you can discuss with the organization and look at prior literature and think about, is that reasonable? Can you reasonably expect this intervention of information sharing would increase the sales by 60%? And if you don't think that's possible, then you have to find a way to increase the sample size, which sometimes is not possible. Okay, so and then obviously in this process, you come up with the entire timeline of your intervention, what is your pre-intervention period, right? What do you need pre-intervention survey or interviews? What's the launch date? The post-intervention period, how long would that be? Do you need post-intervention surveys or interviews? And if you need pre-intervention surveys, you would start drafting those survey instruments and then prepare and apply for IRB approval. And eventually you get to a point, the decision point, which is go or no go, right? And I would say when I first started the process of doing field experiments, I would get very excited about any opportunity that a company would say yes to me because it's so rare. And I would want to, oh, they're willing to implement this, so I should do it. And now as I go through more of these, and especially getting criticisms and pushbacks from editors and reviewers, now you think about this more before you launch it, right? So if you think there is not enough contribution, people have done something similar. If you think the sample size is too small, the data is too noisy, it's better to stop doing that at this point. Okay. And so so a lot of the field experiment effort is in this step, is the ex ante design, which is also what I love about doing field experiments. I guess lab experiments is similar in that way too. So next would be increasingly people would want you to pre-register your experiment so that because the whole idea is you design the study beforehand and you carry it out and you report a finding truthfully, even if the results are null effects, like you don't find significance, right? As opposed to exposed doing econometric gymnastics to to torture the data to get to cherry pick the findings, right? So, but then how can you convince people that you didn't cherry pick your findings? It would be to pre-register experiment in like online registries such as this one, which is I think the American Economic Review's registry. And then you do your pre-implementation work, test and implement pre-intervention surveys. So in my case, other than the one that's implemented in the US, yeah, so basically the last two experiments were carried out in languages that are not English. So we have to hire people, we have to draft it in English, translate into the local language, and then translate it back into English to make sure that nothing is lost in translation, and test and finalize details of the intervention. So basically we have a big task spreadsheet that decompose each steps into different mini tasks and say, what is this task, when it needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and who is responsible for that. The researcher, which researcher, the people at the organization, and who that person is. And basically then gather all the pre-intervention data, and then you launch. So all of this is incredibly similar to any product launch, I guess, within a company, which is why I personally find it very exciting. And with the intervention, you launch it, you check and make sure that it's done according to the protocol you designed. So you actually have to check that. And sometimes it's not done according to the way you design, and you have to abandon that at that point, which is quite painful. Collect data and the examples. So you can't just collect the data that's helpful for you to run the difference in difference, but also examples of the best practices posts, right? Examples of the posters, so you can give your academic audience a concrete idea about what information is being shared, and then check data quality, adapt or put out fires as you go. And post-intervention, you would implement post-intervention surveys or interviews if it's helpful, and then collect all the data. And then when you come to analysis, it's actually very simple. It's just you analyze the data you collected using the method you already decided in your initial proposal. You show covariant balance, you test parallel trends, you do different diff, right? There's not really there's not a lot of fancy stuff here. And you test the hypothesis that you outlined in the initial proposal, and you report and discuss step 13, which goes back to Ken's first question is, do we follow up with the organization to see what happens afterwards? And this is step 13. We report and discuss preliminary findings with the organization. There are two purposes. One is we want to get their feedback, right? Because do you think this makes sense? What we're finding here, and if it makes sense, why do you think it makes sense? If it doesn't make sense, why? And so we can adapt, maybe collect additional data or modify some of the analysis. And then the other purpose is to decide the possible next steps. So basically, in the case of the European grocery store chain, they have then decided to have these best practices, like permanently displayed there, although like maybe using a less, like a more cost efficient way of carrying out the best practices sharing process. And then similarly with the sharing of the performance data in the gas utility company, basically they look at the findings and they decided to roll it out to all of the work groups with some modifications, because they realize with so they see that there are positive effects from sharing the performance information, but they see that some people are basically kind of not wanting to stand out, like being singled out for their performance. So they decided to roll out this sharing to the entire group, but not at such granular level. So maybe aggregate things to the work group level. And so further analysis, and then once you do that, the next step is you conduct some of the further analysis you didn't think of before. You write a paper and hopefully get it published. So those are the steps in my experience. And I want to say that these randomized controlled trials are very valuable and exciting. And please reach out to me if you know organizations that are open to collaboration, or if you want to know more about running field experiments. And this is the reference of the 3 papers that I covered, the 3 studies that I covered today. So thank you. And I'm happy to answer your questions. And again, I apologize if I sound a little, like my voice sounds a little broken from time to time, because I actually have a surgery coming up right after this presentation. And so I couldn't eat or drink or even drink water since midnight.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Shelley, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Lee King, yes.
Oh, yeah, you can unmute yourself, but I'm going to read Ken's last comment. I think you or the reviewers and editors might be too hung up on statistical significance. We publish field studies with samples as few as 1, no statistical significance. Why wouldn't the same principle work here? If you can demonstrate effects on a small number of participants, why not report it? And further research can see if it generates. I mean, I completely agree. Ken, I don't think I want to be hung up on statistical significance. I think even one organization with a small sample, as long as we have a lot of these studies and knowledge accumulate, right? You learn something, which I think, this pre-register the field experiment thing is at least is intended to help in that direction. So the idea is I thought through my research question and design carefully, right? I'm just gonna carry it out, and I won't cherry pick my findings or torture my data. I'll report it, even if it's statistically not significant, but it'll become one data point, not one data point. It become one study in. Hopefully, it's going to become mountains of studies on the topic. Yeah. Okay. Thank
King,
you.
King, you have a
Okay.
question?
Oh, you.
Your mic
Okay.
is mute, King.
How about now? Sorry. How about
Yeah.
now? Oh, sorry
Yeah.
about that. So very nice presentation. I enjoy it. Actually, I'm also doing experiments, so I enjoy your presentation. So I have a few questions about your projects. For example, the last one about the best practice. I'm wondering about the interpretation of the result. So one potential interpretation would be, because this is not like anonymous sharing. This is from companies' employees. So when
Right.
the employees, when they read the sharing, they may interpret this as some kind of policies that the company want to implement. Because after all, this sharing, I believe, has been filtered by the company before they got published.
Yeah.
So, so in a way, this is like maybe people will follow this not just because they know about the this kind of practice, but because they think the company want to implement that, and since they're working there, so they just follow more closely. So maybe they know it already. That's what I'm saying. They know they were know it already, but now they pay more attention and.
Okay.
Doing
Yeah,
more.
I see what you're saying. You're saying is that it's really not a lack of knowledge on best practices, a lack of information. It's more that previously they didn't really care about implementing that, right? I think that's a good point. So I didn't have time to go into details about the setting. These are franchise stores. So they're not just like I'm working for other people. They're working for themselves. And so they're franchisees. This is, you know, if you're the store owner, this is your store, right? So there is no incentive for the franchisee to not implement if they know this is a best practice and this is going to increase my sales outcome, and I'm not going to implement it, because increasing the sales outcome directly benefits them, because they're not company-owned stores. They're not like working for other people. It's
Oh, I see.
they're using the company's brands and
Oh,
platform and system, but they are franchisees. They're their own stores.
I see. Oh, yeah, okay. I see. That makes sense.
Yeah,
And
you
then,
see, but this is
yeah.
very important. I mean, to describe the setting very, very carefully. Yes, and again goes back to Ken's generalizability question. So if you look at our paper, like in the conclusion section, we would talk about, okay, what we think these kind of findings can generalize to, what kind of companies for which this intervention's findings can generalize to, where we kind of mention, okay, our setting is a setting where all of the stores are franchisees and they're motivated to use the information, right? But so if you're a setting where people are not motivated to use the information to improve their performance, and maybe that's not generalizable.
Right, because they also, you know, examples or evidence where people can have like, you know, hurting on bad behavior and something like this. So it's not, you know, sharing
Yeah.
is not necessarily good. Then I have a question. If there's a time, I don't know whether there's a time actually for
Oh,
the
go ahead.
for the first project, first experiment. Do you measure the, you know, one interpretation from the paper, from your presentation is you improve on, you know, not so high quality supervision supervisors, but do you actually check whether the this supervision quality improve after this you know, intervention?
Oh, that's a good point. We didn't have time to check on that, which is essentially how do the supervisors respond to this intervention? Do they respond by adjusting their performance feedback? At least during the intervention, we didn't see the supervisors behaving in any way that's, you know, significantly different from before. Maybe they didn't have to share information as much because now all of a sudden people can see their own information. But other than that, do they feel like now, and that's actually very interesting, I think, do they now feel like, oh, I don't have to spend my time just giving people the information. So now, so like that part of my role is taken over by the data, but now what do I do in performance feedback? Do I do more of the coaching and guidance? So yeah, so I don't know, but that's a good question.
Yeah, but then the evidence seems more in line with, also in line with what you know, discuss is about attention of the workers. They pay more attention to their own performance because of feedback. So that makes sense.
Yeah. It would be nice to see the long-term effects of these experiments, and yeah, so or do something like a follow-up experiment. Yeah, and also, by the way, you guys can email me or follow me on find me on LinkedIn, search for my name, and if you, so we can continue the conversation. Mohammed?
Yes, thank you very much, dear Mr. Shay, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you very everyone join us today. Thank you very much. It has been appreciated for taking the time to present to us, the Professor Shay.
Thank you. Thank
And
you
I
all
hope
for attending.
and I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very, very welcome.
I hope so too. Okay, thank you. Thank you to
very
all of
much.
you. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bye.